Well, welcome everyone to this episode of Wizards of the Couch. Thanks for joining me once again on July 15th. Danny Grimes and my three fellow couch wizards, Casey Rift, Brian in absentia Berg, and Jimmy Duffy. And we're going to be sitting around the virtual couch tonight talking games and gaming and cartography with Anna Meyer. And we're looking forward to having a couple of drinks and some great discussion. So before we get started, just a warning, it's an adult show, so, profanity is allowed. We just don't allow ourselves to string it together. So I'm particularly concerned about Anna because she really seems like she might get off the chain, and I don't want anything, I don't want anything untoward to happen. So anyway, I'm Danny Grimes. I'm a professional GM at Gen Con. I run a lot of Call of Cthulhu games there and at other conventions. I'm a terrain builder and a maker, and while I would normally be drinking whiskey, I am a little under the weather, so I am just having water tonight, but I will still drink along with everyone to whatever effect that may be. Matt?
Hey, good evening, and I'm Casey Rift online. It's Matt Everhart in person, I suppose. I'm the owner of Kobold Con, and I guess one of the guys responsible for the Blackwood Society organized play. Tonight, I am not feeling under the weather, and I am drinking a local brew called, it's from a local brewing company here in Boise called Mad Swede, and it's Caber Toss This, you wee lad.
Wow.
Where did you get that?
It's a Scottish ale, and I picked it up almost exclusively because of the name, so we'll see.
Bravo.
Marketing works. Works. I think next we would be seeing Brian, but unfortunately, Brian is missing in action. Yeah, it is unfortunate. He is the director of operations around here, such that it is, and he is also the director over at Total Party Kill Games. I'm sure if you've been to conventions, you have seen him because he is, I think, literally at every convention.
Everyone knows Brian. Yeah, he's just about every
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, and what's really amazing is how he gets there. We'll go into that when he comes again. Watching him roll up is always a treat. And Jimmy
Duffy here, Duff563, one of the wizards here, and also owner-operator of the Twitch channel, Praetor's Rejects. And we will be running games on the channel starting this week. New games on my channel, and Friday night, a beginner session of finally off the ground, Lost Mines of Phandelver. And then somewhere down the line, we'll get Sanctuary back on track.
No comment.
Be quiet. And we'll go from there. But yes, welcome everybody to the channel tonight. So shall we introduce somebody? Brian? Danny?
So without further ado, this episode, we are going to talk about mapping worlds of imagination, cartography, drawing, all sorts of methods to convey what's going on when you move your little people around, or how do you gain that sense of spatial awareness in the game. So Anna Meyer is joining us tonight. Welcome, Anna.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I'm super excited about this. I've been super excited for weeks since I knew this. In fact, I sent Anna, we sent a little package out to people to just kind of get to know them and so forth. And as soon as I had her name, I sent it immediately, and I wanted to be completely prepared because this is very cool. Some of you may know Anna because she has a expansive creation/curation project. It's a fan project for the world of Greyhawk. And when I tell you that it is extensive and detailed, it is right up my alley. You can keep zooming in. I was looking for names on trees, but thankfully,
not that much yet. It will come though.
Anna, you reined it back in, and then also you may know her because she's done a lot of work with Wolfgang Bauer's Kobold Press lately, especially in the Midgard series. So I'm sure we're going to talk about all of that and more cool stuff. I think Anna is going to stick in with us as long as possible tonight. So we're just going to kind of continue the conversation after the interview. So once again, welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much.
Let's not forget our patrons too. I think I saw a couple on.
Oh, please go ahead.
Yes.
Let's see. Well, Anna obviously is one of them, and our first
one.
Yep. Yeah, I was the first one. Yeah, I love I saw you one of your pilots or early pilots, and I thought it was so cool. So that was I want to see more of it. So
yeah, it's kind of
it's
a funny
like a gift that keeps giving. I just can't believe we got you on here.
Yeah, so it was that in and of itself was kind of a funny story because we were doing the pilot, as you said. It wasn't even episode 0 yet. We were just testing to make sure we could all connect, and all of a sudden Anna pops in, and we're like,
Well,
oh,
it was
hi.
simply because I think it was Brian who had posted something in Facebook or something like that on his and since we are Facebook friends and we meet at Gen Con and other conventions and stuff, it just popped up and I was sitting working, so I just clicked on the link and there we went. And you were babbling and having fun and talk about interesting things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think babbling is an
Babbling's the
understatement.
right word. Yes.
Well, it was the piloting, and you were just setting up the technology and all that stuff. So
If you
yeah.
want to help us with marketing, I think you've got a keen insight into our strengths.
No, I'm not really much of a marketing person. I love to sit by myself and tweak with things that no one else understands, except when you come to conventions or places like this, when all of a sudden people understand what I'm doing, and I just love that.
I think in past sessions we've talked about that's kind of the statement, the Magna Carta of gamers. It's a place where you can go and talk with people and they understand what you're talking about.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And want to hear it and then want to share their story about the same thing.
Yep.
So we kind of roll out with 3 standard questions for everybody because we just like to get a little baseline of like where it all started and what you really like about gaming. So what was that moment in your life where you're like, D&D or whatever game it may have been that really attracted you to it?
I was dragged in without knowing what it was, not kicking, screaming, but almost, so to speak. I had a friend, and he wanted to have some. He needed some people in his gaming group, and he simply just said that, we need someone else, and I was available, so they simply come on and sit down and play this game. I never read Tolkien. I didn't know what elves or any fantasy at all, so I sat down and played. And the first time it was kind of, what crap is this? But then they convinced me to try again the second time, and actually then it was kind of, this is kind of cool. And then I understood what the whole concept was. I was supposed to play some warrior and run around, and something killed me the first time, and it wasn't that much fun. And I realized this is crappy. But the second time, after a couple of hours into it, then I understood the concept. I was 15 years old. It was back in Sweden, and we only had one set of dice for the whole table. So that was the premises. This 79, 80, something like that.
Dice are hard to come by, especially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we only had a Xerox copy of a copy of the rules or something like that someone had been in America, had no clue who was, and got the I think it was the one of the early boxes, the brown box or the white box or something like that, or maybe the red box. I'm not really sure what those copies were, because then I got to grab one of the original red box for myself and one set of dice, and we started playing, and then it was awesome fun. I loved it, and I started reading the Tolkien books and started getting into it, and I just loved it from ever since.
Yeah,
wow,
it's I think you're the first. I would think you're the first person who said they came to it by someone else bringing them to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So many people we've talked to so far have been like their own first GM, or like they were the one who was willing to buy the box, and so that's really interesting to hear their perspective. I give you full points for sticking it out past that first pointless death.
That was
because that's a hard thing to deal with. You're like,
but the good thing, it happened so early, and I never got a chance to really get in the know of the character and fall in love with my own character and all that. So it was still a game for me when the character died, and it didn't mean anything more. I think it's much worse if it happened and then we got a really cruel DM for a while, so we always died every session. So I was so happy the first time I had a character who could level up to 3rd level. That was like a year afterwards, and I was like, I was ecstatic for a week or something like that. It was simply amazing. And then so it was, but that was the early editions of D&D were very lethal too. So it was not only our game, they were all very lethal.
Yeah, that was one of those situations where she had Anna, the fighter, and when Anna died, then she came back with Santa.
Yeah, exactly, something like that. Number 2, and the brother
Brianna,
or the sister. Yeah, exactly. You just add. Yeah, and we usually took names from the Tolkien books or whatever. So and because we didn't have that much fantasy or something to work on, it takes you have to get in the groove, and I didn't have that. That took years. Yeah,
I secretly had that compendium that went with the Tolkien books that had all the names by Robert Foster, and none of my I didn't tell my friends I had it, so I'd show up for games with these names. It's like, where do you get these names? I'm like,
Yep,
don't
yep.
worry about it, man.
Yep.
Yeah, so playing back that long, we were talking with Jen Page way earlier on. I've always had women in my game. Were there more women than you in that group?
No, no, not really. But on the other hand, no one else played. We had no one else to look up to, meaning there was no norm. There was only us. The first couple of years, we didn't know about anyone else who played. It took several years. So we didn't realize it was only for nerdy guys who and I didn't. So we had no reference. There was no one telling us what we did was wrong or whatever, or not fun or not cool. So there was an advantage of living way out in another country somewhere else, because there were other gamers around in Sweden, but we had no clue about it. This is before the internet. Well, we had color TV and tape recorders. That was about it. But we were so isolated that way. And then eventually there was one store in Gothenburg, like an hour away, that started storing game stuff and so on a couple of years later. So we could start buying dice, miniatures, and occasional books. And you basically had to order them, and then it took a month and you got it. So it was very isolated. So we were our own little bubble, so to speak.
Right.
Set our own norms and stuff, and you couldn't go on the internet, or you couldn't even read anywhere how to play it. So when the dragon came, you simply devoured every page of it and try and distill in my 15, 16-year-old person's English, so to speak. And that was also a good way for me to get into the language, because I basically have to start understanding not only the words, but the meaning of it. I have to decipher how to do rules and stuff. So that was how we did it. And so I didn't have any concept of this was for guys or girls or anything like that. We just played. Yeah.
So what keeps you coming back? Like what's the thing that engaged you now all these years later? Your favorite,
now it is
your favorite thing. What's your favorite thing?
Yeah, my favorite thing is that you have a world that you can live in a fantasy, so to speak. It's not so much the game and the statistics or the XP or the number crunching. For me, it's kind of a theater of the mind. You sit around the table and you have that kind of wonderful feeling of being in another world with others, and also running games, because after a couple of years, I became the person in our gaming group that ran games most of the time. So that became to entertain others with my stories, and we made them together, and you have to build that game world, so to speak. That was simply just fantastic. That feeling is unbeatable. It's one of the biggest passions I have in my life. It's always been there since.
Yeah, that is cool. I didn't realize you were a game master. That's awesome.
That's
We'll
after a couple of years.
Next time, yeah.
Yeah, so after a couple of years, the guy that started our gaming group, he took off and got a scholarship somewhere and started education and disappeared. And I became the person that at first we took turns, and when we'd done it 2 or 3 times, everyone pointed at me and said, "No, you run the games from now on." And that became it, so to speak. And then I found the Greyhawk box. That was just before that, because I was always wondering, because the DM, where does he get all these cool stories from? And they're unique and all that. And I didn't realize he was reading Lord of the Rings and other fantasy and just paraphrased from it, basically. And then when the Greyhawk box came, I started reading it in the store and was like, this is where it comes from. And I bought it in secret and read it through. And then I've run my games in Greyhawk ever since. And that's back in '83 when it came out.
So were maps part of that even early on?
Yes. Yeah. I always loved maps and landscapes. But so the thing for me was that very quickly I realized when reading Dragon magazine that everyone who games, I guess we all dream about being a game designer or design new rules or monsters and stories and write adventures and all that. But I realized fairly quickly that I wasn't as good as a lot of other people who wrote these things. But when it came to maps, that was my kind of niche, so to speak. I'm so interested in landscapes and I'm an avid nature photographer, hiker. I've been flying planes, so I've looked at the world from above, so to speak. So I'm so used to landscape, and I wanted to know what the fantasy world looked like. And so I simply wanted a map that showed me what Greyhawk look like, so it can inspire me, and so I know what little hill to build a castle on, or where the orcs should do the kind of do the encounter, where should it be, where should they ambush the party and stuff like that. So that became my thing, and I realized that most cartographers, they do dungeons. That is like 1,000 awesome artists that do Dungeons, but not that many that do the setting maps.
Yeah, there aren't that many.
Yeah, so
Right.
that became my niche. That's when I realized that's where I'm competitive, so to speak. Then I'm good enough to be one of the best ones in the world on that little niche.
How are they competitive? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So yeah, and that right there, I'm really interested in hearing more about because I really think that the thing that motivates us to see the space in our heads and want to somehow transcribe it. But so just a couple more, one more softball and then a really critical cartography question. And this can be a short answer if you want. Best GM you ever had and why? And you can include yourself.
No, not myself. Probably the best DM I've ever had is a friend, Brian Darnell. He lives in Hemet, used to live in Hemet. Now he moved to Portland a few months ago. I was up on his wedding a couple of weeks ago and drove up to Portland from sunny California and then back again. And he is probably the best DM I've ever had. He's just simply fantastic. He knows the rules and he runs the game so damn fluid. It's kind of just amazing. And so he's probably the best. And I've played with a lot of DMs over the years, but in many ways, he is the best kind of, I would say, overall. I've had better DMs who have been better storytellers or the better ones organizing the game, but he's kind of hitting that sweet spot. He's an entertainer and he has all the facts and all the crunch and all that so he's kind of a good mix between the DM that knows everything and the DM that just is awesome to listen to. So yeah.
Cool. So the cartography specific question, although I think now I might have a guess, hexes or grids?
When it comes to Dungeon maps, I want grids. But when it comes to overland maps, I don't want any of it. Yeah, I don't want any more than necessary. I can have that as an overlay occasionally, but I don't want any crappy hexes or any of that unless they're needed, so to speak.
Is that just a key in the bottom saying how inches, 50 miles or whatever?
And I use maps digitally, and I print them only to show at conventions and stuff. When I'm running games, I'm purely digital nowadays. So I can have a hex version when I need it, and not that's it. I don't want to have hexes permanently or squares or any of that.
Cool. So, well, I guess what we were talking about before. This started out as a hobby, but then there's always that point, when Wizards finally had the SRD available and all that, where we all felt like we could participate in a more full way. And that was a lot of people's jumping off point to enter into the industry rather than just being a hobbyist. So what was it that started you in like formal map design?
It was when I moved 8.5 years ago, I moved to California and I realized now I quit my job. Ended my career. I moved here. I need something to do. So I was like, let's sit down and finish my Greyhawk map. I started doing the map in 1997, 98. So it's kind of, it was then it was like 10 years. And I worked for like 3-4 years on it over 10 years as a hobby from time to time. And I realized now I'm going to sit down and finish it. And I did that, and it took about 2.5 years. And before then, at the end of it, when it was almost done, then Wolfgang Bauer reached out to me. Oh, can you start doing maps for me? And I started doing that, and a couple of other publishers started reaching out. I was Annie nominated for my Greyhawk map, and it just rolled on. And things started coming in, and I finished my Greyhawk map, and now through Patreon, that's half my income, so to speak, and half my time is devoted to my project, my hobby, and the other half is doing maps for publishers and stuff.
Yeah, that is really inspiring because I spend a lot more time drawing maps to a degree for myself than I ever would. The idea, especially of your Greyhawk map, I mean, if anybody has not seen this, we can put the link down in the doobly-doo below at some point. But it is truly staggering. For me, I always think of things like that in layers. So when you obviously I have the original maps, and that has a ton of information, but you go so much further than that. Like, where do you source that information? How do you
I
know?
practically, what I did was that I collected, I was a part owner of a game store for like 10, 15 years and back in Sweden. So when they were releasing stuff from TSR, when I got their catalog, I simply say, I want this and this and this and this. And every month there was a little box for me in the store. So I simply took that and put it in my shelves. So over the years, I got a really good collection of Greyhawk material, Greyhawk related material that way. And then when the internet came around, I started going to all the websites and stuff, and I worked in kind of things that we had early access to the internet, and so we had a good IT department. So they actually wrote me a script that could crawl the internet. This is the early 90s. So I simply, so this is before Alta Vista and all that. So we crawled the internet and simply for the word Greyhawk. So there was a lot of camping related stuff that I had to weed out in the beginning, but after a while, and then the Living Greyhawk campaign came around, and I started getting a little bit of feedback, and people started sending me stuff. So I simply collected information and put it in a database and kept doing it for years and years and years. So now I basically have a digital collection of all the information that has ever been published about Greyhawk, and then some. Because I've got some cool stuff that people that worked with Greyhawk over the years have sent me stuff that has never been published, and their ideas and stuff like that. So and I read everything. I read all the fan stuff, everything I've gotten hold of Greyhawk. I've read it. So when I worked on an area, I simply collected all the information I had and made a bundle of like 200 pages, printed them out, and had them as reading. I had a highlighted marker and just highlighted everything that was interesting. And then I did it digitally when I got an iPad. So then I had a PDF and I just highlighted the stuff. And then I took a note of every highlight and started putting it on the map. So I worked on, and then that was how it started. And then I had all my fans. So I put it up on the internet, and people criticized the hell out of it. And that way they get me the rest. That's my quality control team, so to speak.
The most brutal quality control team you can expose yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Now my maps get scrutinized by a lot of the people that wrote the stuff. So now I have access to that, and they kind of keep an eye on it. It's like I'm working on Lindor Isles to redo them in way more detail, and then I will get help of Len Lakofkan. It's his turf. He invented it. So that way we can do the definitive version of the Lindor Isles map, so to speak. So
I am so glad that was your answer. That basically you invented a rabbit hole and you went all the way down it.
Just kept doing it and kept it. And the interesting thing is, you go back 10 years ago, there was no market for stuff like this. Today, in today's world, there is a job. If you do this and you get really, really good at something that is this narrow, since there is a world market for stuff, you can actually earn a decent, or at least kind of barely, you can pay your bills at least doing this. But my advice to anyone: don't go into the RPG business in order to make money. No. It's a dead end with money. But I'm in that spot that I don't have a family to feed, and I don't have to have kids to send through college and a big mortgage to pay and stuff like that. So that way I can actually do this full time.
That's interesting. I tend to agree with you. I think all of us feel, similarly. I think Brian, who's not here, I'll speak for Brian. He said there's nobody really properly famous in role-playing.
Well, they are now.
But see, I said this to him. I said, well, there are a few people who are properly famous. And apparently Forbes thinks that there's 40 million of us.
Oh, exactly. And that's what I mean. I think we will have our first people that earn $1 million a year in a couple of years in this. It's starting to be like sports, meaning there are a mass of people who love to do this, and they have to pay. And then you start having a little bit of people that a fair bit amount that earns a little bit of money. And then you have a much smaller that earns enough to scrape by, and then you have a tiny little elite at the top that earns a hell of a lot of money. And I'm like in that kind of middle part where you can scrape by, so to speak.
I was also encouraged to hear you say how much you love the outdoor map too, because when I love drawing indoor maps. I can draw a fair dungeon, but my favorite is also, I want to see where the cities are. I'm much more interested in running a political game generally. So I like a city map or a country map, rather than the interior of a building. Plus, I think that's pretty, that's been done a lot.
Yeah.
When I run games, I frequently just scour Google until I see a shot of something that I think that's inspiring, and that's my in now.
Yeah,
So,
but it also depends on how you run the game, because I've been as a player, been in some awesome campaigns that basically just go from indoor to indoor scene. They're like a sitcom, but they're still fantastic games. But the campaign world is just like a backdrop that is there to give some flavors between, meaning the names are different from towns and cities, but it's all about each adventure location, and there might be an encounter location on the way. And for me, that's a perfect way to run a game and a campaign, and I can really enjoy playing in it. But that's not the way I run it. I want to have a living world where the characters can go anywhere, and I don't know how the campaign will end. I just know who the creatures and monsters and the inhabitants are in an area and what it looks like, and then I just let them loose and see what happens.
So when we're going to be able to come back to some of these and get even more in depth later on, after our first little segment. But I do want to say, you mentioned being purely digital. So VTT is considered de rigueur now. If you're going to put out a game, you got to have your VTT assets set up. As an avowed like Adobe Suite person, like I know how to create all those assets, but it's just like required now. So how do you approach that? I mean, I assume you agree with that, or no?
Yeah. I've used a multitude of tools, but I've started using Roll20 and D20 Pro back in the day, but I'm gravitating towards Fantasy Grounds now, I think. But that they are starting to come up to be the most premier, so to speak. So I'm gravitating towards that. So it will be more and more of it. And also run Zoom. That's one of the reasons I got a pro subscription of Zoom, both for Twitch things and so on, but also for gaming, so I can share my screen, whether that's Photoshop or my big Illustrator map, and I can fog it over and I can blur things they don't know about and stuff, so I can show whatever window I have. And then I have a tool called Realmworks where I have all my notes on my campaign and stuff like that. And then now I have Dungeon Fog. I got a license, so I can make my dungeon maps and stuff in it, and I have all my 3D tools and stuff that I use for my professional mapping. So it's just a multitude of tools and virtual and screen share. So that's so that's how I scrape by. But I'm pretty sure that within 5 years, you will have someone who will basically have the character management, campaign management, and a virtual tabletop and networking all in one tool. And it will probably take about 5 years until we're there. But that's my expectation, is that about 5 years from now, there will be the holy grail tool that can basically do the whole thing in one tool. But we're far from it yet.